separate, different bunch of housing here and pull them in to the Greendale flavor and to the Village of Belle Noire flavor. I'm not saying that it cannot be done. I just don't like to mess with the great diversity of folks and the wonderful working and living relationships that we all have with each other. I don't want to mess with that balance. You know, it's a good one the way it is. If we have to, we will, and we'll try to pull them into the fold as best we can and welcome as best we can, because we're all good people and we want to be good neighbors. But if I had my druthers, I'd rather not mess with it. It's working just fine the way it is, you know, so we'll see.
Sprawl can mean different things to different people, but in St. Louis, sprawl can be summed up with one statistic. In the 30 years between 1970 and 2000, the amount of developed land in metropolitan St. Louis increased by a whopping 80%, while the population grew by a paltry 11%. When land is developed 7 times faster than the population and tax base to support it, everyone loses.
What governments have to be careful about in either establishing policies or perhaps forgetting to establish policies is who's going to pay for the expanded infrastructure, particularly if you don't have a corresponding number of expanding taxpayers. So usually the problems come up is when a geographic area keeps developing new areas without developing new taxpayers. Pretty soon, you might have 1 million people that are supporting a state highway system that consists of 5,000 miles. And then pretty soon, after maybe 20 years, you have the same number of people supporting a state highway system that consists of 10,000 miles. Well, in simple terms, you'd need twice as much money for a 10,000 mile system as you would a 5,000 mile system, but people generally aren't interested in doubling their taxes. So because taxes usually don't keep up with the cost of infrastructure, decisions have to begin to be made about whose infrastructure is going to get attention and whose isn't. And if you expand the infrastructure, the other side of that coin is that you have less left to maintain what you've already built. And St. Louis population has increased very little in 35 years, but our infrastructure has had a lot of demands on it to grow. So it's our road system, systems like the light rail system we have, our sewer system, our water system, our electric and gas system, all those things that have to do with infrastructure and utilities. Somebody had to pay to grow that system without growing hardly any more taxpayers. And that's been the concern of just not having enough money to go around.
What was once one of the densest, most urban American cities has become one of the country's most sprawled out, low-density cities. St. Charles County, just northwest of St. Louis County, is the recipient of much of today's white flight.
St. Charles County was at one point one of the fastest growing counties in the country. It has about the same population as the city of St. Louis now, and will soon surpass it. And you know, the issue there is, in general, I would argue that federal policies have been biased in favor of sprawl and segregation. That's certainly the argument we make in the Place Matters book. And essentially, the policies are tilted. Everybody pays attention to the social welfare policies, and certainly they exist. And the earned income tax credit now is one of the most important ones. And you have temporary assistance for needy families. You have aid for mass transit that comes through ICE-T and T21. And so you do have programs that do benefit cities primarily, but the big infrastructure programs, the big things that influence the location of economic activity have tended to favor suburban and even exurban locations. Basically, the preponderance of spending on highways, the dedicated gas tax at the state and the federal level that goes overwhelmingly for highways. You have sewer and water grants from the federal government and other sources. You have existing, utilities that essentially set rates uniformly across the region, which means that existing ratepayers are subsidizing the development on the fringe, and the studies have shown that that sprawled out low density development is much more expensive. So here in the city of St. Louis, it really is extreme because we have the city of St. Louis, which is an envelope that could hold 850,000 and did hold 850,000 in 1950 and now holds 350,000. So all the infrastructure is in place for 500,000 people to live, but instead we're abandoning that infrastructure and we're building new infrastructure on the fringe. And that new infrastructure is more expensive because of the nature of the development. Each sewer line, each water line, the road structure is much more expensive. So once again, you know, we're subsidizing development on the fringe at the same time that the older areas are experiencing a disinvestment. And I think that, you know, it's not just a kind of dollars and cents kind of calculation. It's more than that drives this process. That as the middle class moves out, and the housing that's built on the urban fringe, research has shown recently, tends to be very upscale. In other words, developers are not building homes that they did, let's say, 40 or 50 years ago, building starter homes at, let's say today, at 120,000, 150,000, 180,000. They're building generally 200,000 and up, you know, with 2,500 square foot, 3,000 square feet, these kind of things. So there is a kind of, it promotes class segregation as the middle class moves out to these somewhat subsidized new homes on the fringe. It leaves behind a poorer population in the older suburbs or the inner city neighborhoods. And once again, if you get areas that have large rates of poverty and few resources, you start to get other problems, social problems basically. You get underperforming schools, you get instability, people move a lot, and that affects the sort of strength of the community. You lose political clout. So there's processes that are kind of biasing, kind of tilting the field of development here. It's like a snowball rolling down a hill. As the snowball gets rolling, it gets bigger and bigger and has a certain momentum. So right now, it's very hard in St. Louis to reverse that momentum and to get people to think about. As I said, I think the city of St. Louis is experiencing real reinvestment pressures in selected neighborhoods. And there's no doubt that there is billions of dollars worth of new construction taking place in the city of St. Louis. Whether it will reverse the population decline, I'm not sure, but eventually I think it will stabilize for sure in the next decade. But the entering suburbs, once again, is more my concern.
So, how can focusing on these macro problems help save the Normandie, you ask? It is true, perhaps, that addressing these issues will do little to save the Normandie, which requires a more immediate remedy. Its best bet for survival is probably something more conventional, like the establishment of a trust to permanently fund the course, or to engage in vigorous testing of the soil to prove that unsettling a century of fertilizer and chemicals would pose a serious, unmitigatable environmental threat to the surrounding area. Talk has even circulated that Clayton, the very wealthy seat of the county, might be able to purchase the course. But working on the big picture issues of political balkanization, racial segregation, and suburban sprawl would help guarantee that there would never again be another Normandie on the chop block. So let's take balkanization. St. Louis's legendary fragmentation has been the focus of debate for nearly a century. A well-funded and heavily publicized effort to rejoin the city and county, of which this cartoon by Daniel R. Fitzpatrick was a part, was rejected by the voters in 1923. A similar effort in 1959 also failed. Both of these plans included some form of consolidation among the micro-municipalities, and therein was the problem. St. Louisans love their fiefdoms, no matter how fiscally irresponsible they may be. So then, there might be some way to cooperate rather than consolidate.
Really what's needed is the kind of thing that you mentioned in terms of the First Suburbs Consortium in Cleveland, where they would bind together because to a certain extent, you know, it's like the old Patrick Henry, we're all going to, if we don't hang together, we're going to hang separately, you know. They need to get together and, you know, it's there's no such thing as an island unto itself, you know. They can't survive individually. There's going to have to be a broader set of policies, and also they need to go to that second stage from strategic planning. They need to go to the kind of political action stage where they form a consortium. They begin to look at you know, some of the laws that are really tilted against them and try to get their share of federal and state monies, begin to think strategically about economic development in a broader sense. Maybe the jobs aren't located in one city, but maybe if a number of cities get together, they can share the tax revenue from that development.
What about racial segregation? There is clearly a resistance to integration that can be witnessed to this day. You can literally watch as neighborhoods in Florissant and Blackjack hit the tipping point of, say, 10%, then they quickly resegregate. And African Americans are still largely steered to certain areas, just as they were in the past, as evidenced by this map based on the 2000 census. The darkest two shades are census tracts where more than 75% of the population is African American. The lightest two shades are tracts where more than 90% of the population is white. It appears that the northern half of St. Louis County has been cordoned off for blacks, the southern half for whites. So what can be done to prevent the panic selling that seems to inevitably follow the tipping point? Well, let's look at Belle Noire. It took a proactive stance to combat the very psychological roots of market destabilization. And then there are the laws that are already in the books that can be more aggressively enforced, like the Fair Housing Act. Are suburban municipalities zoning in an exclusionary manner, creating ghettos in the older communities? There have been a handful of communities throughout the nation that have succeeded in achieving a racial balance through innovative marketing and zoning techniques, including Oak Park, Illinois, Maplewood and South Orange, New Jersey, and Cleveland Heights, Ohio, among others. Perhaps these cities' successes can be reproduced throughout the St. Louis area. Finally, one of the biggest challenges any metropolis has to face, suburban sprawl. But what can be done to slow the entrenched sprawl machine? First, the state of Missouri could stop disproportionately spending capital improvement dollars in developing areas. Why should the people of Belle Noire and the city of St. Louis be subsidizing St. Charles roads and sewers? This could be achieved if the central cities and their inner ring suburbs would take a combined stand against the rural and ex-urban interests at the State House.
In Missouri, now that Kansas City has grown to large size, the people who hate the cities have to hate them both. If the two cities had any sense, they would run the state instead of letting the rural legislators do it. But they don't. They don't get together.
This is not an insurmountable feat, for the populations of St. Louis, Kansas City, and their stressed inner-ring suburbs is actually greater than that of the exurbs and rural areas. The basic premise? Spend the state's resources on maintaining existing neighborhoods, not building new ones. In addition, all newly developing areas should be required, per the 1968 Fair Housing Act, to zone in a more inclusionary manner. After all, there is no reason why the areas that are producing all of the new jobs in the metro area should not also be required to provide housing for those people who would be employed at those jobs. This would lessen the poverty burden on the inner city and its inner ring suburbs by providing opportunity to those who are currently so geographically isolated from it. Breaking up poverty in these areas would also slow the flight of the middle class, and as a result, sprawl would be somewhat tamed, for there would be less blight to flee from. St. Louis has lost so much of its built heritage. Much of the city has been vacated and forgotten. But when is enough enough? When will St. Louisans place a priority in preservation over annihilation? Well, there are positive signs out there. The revitalized Washington Avenue, which was once the heart of the Midwestern garment industry, has witnessed hundreds of millions of dollars worth of new investment. It is now the hottest condo market in the region. The Central West End, a neighborhood that was built in a very East Coast dense fashion, has continued to be a magnet for not only preservationists, but developers interested in infill. Even the long-neglected City Hospital Administration building is being rehabilitated as housing. The Homer Phillips Hospital was saved from decay for the same purpose a few years ago. Downtown Maplewood, once a forgotten little strip, is now teeming with life. The Loop, located in the inner suburb of University City, has sprung back to life with dozens of eclectic shops and restaurants. In fact, its success has spilled over into the city limits of St. Louis. It is this small but growing wave of St. Louisans interested in preserving their past that may ultimately save the Normandie Golf Course.
So it's been frustrating, it's been exciting, it's been what I hope to God I was supposed to do. And I don't know. I guess I'm a rabble rouser. I don't know. I can't figure it out. But maybe someday I'll find out. And I'll be one of the lucky ones, because if St. Peter's black, I'm going in. I don't care what color he is, I'm going in.
Years ago she stood alone, just a fruit farm by her side. One by one, the houses came where the neighborhoods reside. Now folks of Greendale, folks of Belnor live in harmony with the 18 holes and the trees and the valleys and the hills of Normandie. So take your plans and cheap proposals, take them out the door. Don't destroy our cherished treasure there for 100 years or more. Oh, we don't want you, we won't have it, this is our decree. Save the 18 holes and the trees and the valleys and the hills of Normandie. So come ye friends and come ye neighbors, stand up for your town. Don't allow some outside group to tear that golf course down. Oh, tell them you're not welcome, we won't have it, listen to our plea. Save the 18 holes and the trees and the valleys and the hills of Normandie. So take your plans and cheap proposals, take them out the door. Don't destroy our cherished treasure there for 100 years or more. Oh, we don't want you, we won't have it, this is our decree. Save the 18 holes and the trees and the valleys and the hills of Normandie.